Catherine Brush. She was called the Wicked Lady Novelist, and her latest novella was The Red-Headed Woman. It began to be serialized in the Saturday Evening Post before it was later published as a book. And the MGM story department grabbed it before they knew what the story actually was. Now, upon reading it in its entirety, they realized they had bought a straight melodrama about a conniving Midwest sex pot that would not make a particularly good film, and it would also be hell to get through the Hayes office. And this I never understood. F. Scott Fitzgerald was assigned to write the script. Loving, but somehow. He failed to get the twist that it needed, obviously. MGM's production chief, Irving Thalberg, pronounced, "Oh my God, Scott's turned a silly book into a tone poem." The production had been announced to ride the wave of popularity the story had enjoyed in serialization, and the publicity department was busy promoting a search for the red-headed woman to bring the story to the screen. Clara Bow, Joan Crawford, Barbara Stanwyck, even Garbo were mentioned in the press as possibilities. And so many tests were being made that Marie Dressler jokingly posed for photos wearing a red wig. Now, Thalberg needed a new writer, and he needed one in a hurry. And he knew he also needed somebody who really understood wit and could come up with the zingers. The one person who could pull it off was the woman H.L. Mencken had called the first American writer ever to poke fun at sex, Anita Loos. Now, it turned out Thalberg's timing for once was perfect. Anita had been writing scripts since 1912, penned the comedies that rose Doug Fairbanks to stardom, and had written half a dozen plays as well, but she hadn't really written since 1926. She didn't need to. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes had been such a success that she and her husband, John Emerson, spent serious time in Europe, New York, Palm Beach. But by the end of 1931, what hadn't been lost in the stock market, her husband had methodically put into annuities with himself as the sole beneficiary. Now, Anita claimed to be relieved when Emerson said, "Doug, one of us is going to have to go back to work." Well, she knew which one it was, and she happily packed for California and MGM. Now, Anita and Thalberg agreed on their slant for the script for Red-Headed Woman, and Anita wrote what could have been a banal soap opera and turned it into a script riddled with double entendres and clever one-liners. Now they needed an actress who could pull it off, and they found her in Jean Harlow. Now, I have to pause here because we have to appreciate the fact we got the studio, we got the script, we've got the cast. Only now does Thalberg say, "What director's available on Monday?" Those were the days. So they brought in Jack Conway. Now, Conway directed the silent version of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and other successful comedies, but he didn't see anything amusing in the script. He told Anita and Irving, "Look, folks, if you're trying to be funny, I'm here to report a girl like this almost broke up my home." Believe me, it was no joke. Now, Thalberg laughed and thought he could pull it off, but he told him, "Anita, go to the set every day to keep reminding him that the picture's a comedy." So she did, yet another difference from today. Now, Thalberg's attention turned to the Hayes office. Hayes, at this point, we have to remember, was really a lobbyist to the outside world on behalf of Hollywood. He'd been brought in a decade earlier to assure the world it was not Sodom and Gomorrah, and the studios were the ones who paid his $100,000 a year salary. He spent most of his time just walking a tightrope, but he had two men in Los Angeles, the Studio Relations Office, it was called, who genuinely liked movies, Jason Joy and Lamar Trotty. They read the scripts, but more importantly, they watched the films, rough cuts and previews, and they focused on films that they knew from the synopses might be problematic. The synopsis MGM had submitted for Red-Headed Woman had passed muster, but the preview Trotty saw upset him, so he went to conference with Thalberg. Hours and hours later, Trotty reported back to Hayes. "Well, Thalberg feels we're 100% wrong in our attitude towards the story, insisting they intend to play the picture as a road burlesque." Well, Hayes was so concerned, he went directly to Thalberg's ultimate boss, Nick Skank. And the last thing Thalberg wanted or needed was the New York office involved in script revisions. Thank you very much. He assured Skank he would take care of it. He had a plan. Erding knew that the film that they had made so far, it took the audiences way too long to figure out Lil Andrews' Red. They had to have an opening scene that was so blatant, there was no question about the type of woman she was. Anita went back to her yellow pad, wrote her plug for herself, and a classic sequence. In close-up, Harlow smiles at her own reflection in a hand mirror and rhetorically asks, "So gentlemen prefer blondes, do they?" Cut immediately to a scene in a store's dressing room. Our heroine holds out her skirt, sachets in front of the window, and inquires sweetly of the sales lady, "Can you see through this?" When the off-screen voice responds, "I'm afraid so," Jean breaks into a devastating grin and says, "I'll wear it then." In less than 30 seconds, we know Lil Andrews, and the next preview the audience left absolutely howling. They loved it. The scene also served to establish the burlesque nature of the film that Thalberg had promised the Hayes office, and they were appeased by the revisions, at least temporarily. "We believe the changes make all the difference in the world," Trotty wrote Thalberg. "In fact, the treatment now being used ought to make the picture satisfactory under the code and reasonably safe in censored territories. May I take this opportunity to congratulate you?" But Jason Joy warned Will Hayes directly that, quote, "My feeling is that this picture is either very good or very bad. There being no real halfway business. It's dependent on the point of view of the spectator, who sees it as they're either going to see it as farce or they're going to see it as heavy sex." Well, enough people saw it as farce to fill theaters to capacity, but enough others, particularly in the South and in the churches, saw it as heavy sex. They complained loudly and vociferously to the Hayes office and to local governments with a renewed demand for official censorship. Women's organizations and the Catholic Church close behind made the Hayes office approval of Red-Headed Woman into their case in point that Hayes had failed to protect the public. Other studios complained on the side that MGM was getting favorable treatment. Jason Joy privately wrote agonized letters to studio heads about the economic realities of studios and his personal fear of censorship. But Joy had to admit he'd lost the battle. He resigned, and I love this part, he became an executive at Fox. Lamar Trotty soon followed him out the door, and of course Joe Green and his enforcers of the production code loaded for bear and loathing movies. Now I have to do a little aside here because the difference in the way they approached it, once Breen got in, his office read every script, and they didn't necessarily, in fact rarely, actually saw the films. And that's why clever directors such as Dorothy Arzner could get away with the likes of Dance Girl Dance, portraying the dance instructor as a lesbian through hair and costumes, not in the script, thank you very much, and Lucille Ball's character advertising how she was increasing her income by adding furs and jewels with every appearance on the screen, right? But, you know, Breen's power and the power he had changed the way, it's one of the reasons too, so many of the women writers that I love were finally just said, "Oh, to hell with it. This is just getting too hard to write the stories we want to write." Now, the silver lining, I want to point out, of the response to Red-Headed Woman was when it was released, Charles Boyer was packing to go back to Europe. He said, "Oh hell, if I'm only getting cast as a chauffeur, I'm out of here." Well, the fan mail that poured in was enough to make him stay, get him a great contract, and of course, turn him into a major star. Now, with that, enjoy one of my personal favorites, Red-Headed Woman.